The Axis: Germany, Italy and Japan.
Des japanischen Außenministers Matsuoka. In den Straßen Berlins drängen sich Hunderttausende, dem japanischen Außenminister einen herzlichen Empfang zu bereiten.
Communication between the Germans and Italians in Europe and the Japanese in Asia was always going to be a challenge during wartime. But communication was possible overland via the Soviet Union, and so the German invasion in June 1941 shut this route off. Thereafter, the European Axis and Japan traded weapons, technology and raw materials via blockade-running ships, and when this became too hazardous, via submarines. The sail between German-occupied France and Norway all the way to Japanese-controlled Indonesia, or the Dutch East Indies, as it was known at the time. But it was a very long journey, involving weeks at sea, and as the war progressed, increasingly hazardous. Japanese submarines made it to France on several occasions as well, and many older Italian submarines were specially converted as Far Eastern cargo carriers alongside German U-boats. But what about flying? Surely it would have been quicker to simply fly from Europe to Japan, particularly when transporting lighter cargoes, important documents, and people like military and naval attachés and intelligence agents. It has long been suspected that the Germans flew a few extremely long aerial missions to Japan using some of the really large bombers they developed. During the war, the Germans possessed several types of large, four-engine transports that could have made the journey to Asia, chief among them the Junkers Ju-290. Although tests were made in Germany with a modified 290 carrying 45 tons of fuel and cargo, it appears that disagreements with the Japanese about the route the aircraft should take led to the mission's cancellation. But rumours of an air bridge using the Ju-290 have persisted. Some reports of Luftwaffe prisoners of war interrogated after the war suggest that Ju-290s flown by experienced pre-war Lufthansa airline pilots made some flights to Manchuria in Japanese-occupied northern China during the war, but the evidence is sketchy to say the least. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, in his book Inside the Third Reich, talked of flights to Tokyo by another prototype German aircraft, the Junkers Ju-390, made, as he wrote, via the so-called polar route, perhaps from Bardufoss in German-occupied Norway via the Bering Strait to Asia. Reports suggest that the Germans were planning such flights, but whether they actually occurred has yet to be proved. But it may come as a surprise to some to learn that solid, verifiable photographic and film evidence does exist of a successful World War II flight between Western Europe and Tokyo. But it wasn't made by the Germans, but instead by their erstwhile Axis partner, Italy, proving that it was possible during the height of World War II to perform such a stunt. The secret flight originated from Rome on the 29th of June 1942. The aircraft used was one of Italy's largest transport types, the Savoia Marchetti SM-75. The aircraft had first entered service in 1938 and was a tri-motor airliner and transport aircraft. The version used on the Japan mission was the GA, standing for Grande Autonomia, or long range, with modified Alfa Romeo engines and auxiliary fuel tanks, giving a range of 8,005 kilometers, or 4,971 miles, with a crew of 4 or 5 and a much reduced cargo. The first stage of the flight was made from Rome to the easternmost airfield under German control at Zaporizhzhia in Ukraine, a distance of 2,030 kilometers, or 1,260 miles. Here, the Italian Expeditionary Corps in Russia, Mussolini's contribution to Hitler's war on the Eastern Front, had established a refueling and radio base for Italian aircraft. The following day, at 6 p.m., the SM-75 lifted off for the most dangerous leg of the flight, over Soviet territory. The heavy fuel load required for the very long journey meant that the SM-75 could not climb higher than 2,500 feet, and it was slow, making for an inviting target. The SM-75 was spotted by Soviet searchlights and fired on by anti-aircraft guns soon after leaving the airfield. The Italian crew carried no documents or correspondence referring to the Japanese, as Japan and the Soviet Union were not at war. As well as Soviet searchlights and anti-aircraft fire, the SM-75 had to contend with bad weather and also an attempted interception by a Soviet Yak-1 fighter. The SM-75 flew north along the coast of the Aral Sea, skirted Lake Balkhash and the Targabatai Mountains, and out over the Gobi Desert. At 10 p.m. on the 30th of June, the Italians spotted the Yellow River. On they went until they came in to land at a Japanese airfield in Ningxia in northwestern China. The SM-75 had covered 6,000 kilometers, or 3,700 miles, from Ukraine and arrived in Ningxia at 3:30 p.m. on the 1st of July 1942. The SM-75 landed in China so certain precautions could be made before the flight on to Tokyo. Since the American Doolittle raid on Tokyo in 1942, Japanese military aircraft heavily protected the home islands and had orders to shoot down any unidentified aircraft that approached. So the Italian aircraft was repainted in Japanese Hinamaru rising sun markings to hopefully prevent any unfortunate aerial incidents. With a Japanese military officer acting as interpreter aboard, the SM-75 flew the final 2,700 kilometers or 1,700 miles to Tokyo, passing over Beijing, Darien, Seoul in Korea, Yonago, and touched down at Tachikawa Air Base near Tokyo. The Italian aircraft departed from Tokyo on the 16th of July 1942, bound for Rome. It arrived back at Ningxia on the 18th of July at 9:45 p.m. and was repainted back into Italian Air Force markings. Next stop was the Crimea, and 29 hours 25 minutes later, the SM-75 touched down at a Luftwaffe airfield at Odessa, after a distance of 6,350 kilometers, or nearly 4,000 miles. From Odessa, it was a mere hop to Rome, where the SM-75 arrived on the 2nd of August to newsreel cameras and Benito Mussolini greeting the aircraft and crew himself, accompanied by the Japanese military attaché. The Japanese insisted that the Italian flight was kept secret, as they didn't want to annoy the Soviets, but 5 days after the return to Rome, the flight's details were all over the Italian press. In response, Japan stopped further flights over Soviet territory. The Japanese now decided to make their own flight to Europe. The aircraft chosen was a new type, the Tachikawa Ki-77, a low-wing monoplane actually designed to make a record-breaking flight between Tokyo and New York. The flight was cancelled after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and the type had first flown on the 18th of November 1942. Only 2 actually being built. Japanese Prime Minister General Hideki Tojo expressly forbade the Japanese aircraft from following the straightforward route to Europe already pioneered by the Italians. Instead, they would fly to a German airfield at Sarubus in the Crimea via the Indian Ocean. The Ki-77 departed on the 30th of June 1943, initially for Singapore, with 3 Japanese military officers as passengers who were destined for Europe as military attachés. Then, on the 7th of July 1943, the Ki-77 took off from Singapore to make the epic trek to Crimea, carrying 8 tons of fuel. And that was the last anyone ever heard of the Japanese aircraft, which disappeared somewhere over the Indian Ocean. It is now believed that the Japanese plane was intercepted and shot down by British fighters, since the British had, through ultra-intercepts of German Enigma signals traffic, intercepted Luftwaffe discussions in the Crimea concerning the arrival of the Japanese aircraft, including the flight plan. It was a straightforward mission to intercept and destroy the intruder. So apart from the Italian and Japanese flights, no further Axis flights between Europe and Japan have been confirmed. The extremely tenuous air bridge between Europe and Tokyo was never a practical method for communication between the Axis partners, and all personnel, equipment, and raw material exchanges continued to be made via submarine until the German surrender in May 1945. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my new audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. Please do consider supporting my channel at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box.